All right, I'm back. I'm live. It's 2:30 in the morning. Where y'all at? Y'all probably sleep, like dreaming about coffee and stuff. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, we're about to get into this tragedy and hope. Page 192. Resurgence of Japan to 1918. The history of Japan in the 20th century is quite distinct from that of other Asiatic peoples. Among the latter, the impact of the West led to the disruption of the social and economic structure, the abandonment of traditional ideologies, and the revelation of the weakness of native political and military systems. In Japan, these events either did not occur or occurred in a quite different fashion. Until 1945, Japan's political and military systems were strengthened by Western influences. The older Japanese ideology was retained relatively intact, even by those who were most energetic copiers of Western ways, and the changes in the older social structure and economic structure were kept within manageable limits and were directed in a progressive direction. The real reason for these differences probably rests in the ideological factor that the Japanese, even the vigorous westernizers, retained the old Japanese point of view and, as a consequence, were allied with the older Japanese political, economic, and social structure rather than opposed to it, as, for example, westernizers in India and China or in Turkey. The ability of Japanese to westernize without going into opposition to the basic core of the older system gave a degree of discipline and a sense of unquestioning direction to their lives, which allowed Japan to achieve a phenomenal amount of westernization without weakening the older structure or without disrupting it. In a sense, until about 1950, Japan took from Western culture only superficial and material details in an imitative way and amalgamated these newly acquired items around the older ideological, political, military, and social structure to make it more powerful and effective. The essential item which the Japanese retained from their traditional society and did not adopt from Western civilization was the ideology. In time, as we shall see, this was very dangerous to both the societies concerned, to Japan, and to the West. Originally, Japan came into contact with Western civilization in the 16th century, about as early as any other Asiatic peoples, but within 100 years, Japan was able to reject the West, to exterminate most of its Christian converts, and to slam its doors against the interest of any Western influences. A very limited amount of trade was permitted on a restricted basis, but only with the Dutch and only through the single port of Nagasaki. Japan, thus isolated from the world, was dominated by the military dictatorship or shogunate of the Tokugawa family. The imperial family had been retired to a largely religious seclusion, whence it regained, which it reigned but did not rule. Beneath the shogun, the country was organized in a hereditary hierarchy headed by local feudal lords. Beneath these lords, there were, in descending rank, armed retainers, samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants. The whole system was, in theory at least, rigid and unchanging, being based on the double justification of blood and religion. This was in an obvious and sharp contrast with the social organization of China, which was based, in theory, on virtue and on educational training. In Japan, virtue and ability were considered to be hereditary rather than acquired characteristics, and accordingly, each social class had innate differences which had to be maintained by restrictions on intermarriage. The emperor was of the highest level. being descended from the supreme sun goddess, while the lesser lords were descended from the lesser gods of varying degrees of remoteness from the sun goddess. Such a point of view discouraged all revolution or social change and all circulation of the elites, with the result that China's multiplicity of dynasties and rise and fall of families was matched in Japan by a single dynasty whose origins ran back into the remote past. While the dominant individuals of Japanese public life in the 20th century were members of the same families and clans which were dominating Japanese life centuries ago. Yeah, that's like Mitsubishi and Suzuki and all those. They basically just came in, and it's very similar to how the Russian oligarchs, like after the Soviet Union fell,